The cool thing is there's a lot of research that shows that organizations where debate is encouraged, where reason triumphs over ego and emotion, run better and create more value for everyone. They create more value for their shareholders, better products for their customers, more employment and happier work cultures for their employees. There's just such an overwhelming body of evidence that idea meritocracies are better ways to run companies, but it is certainly a difficult transition to move from a top-down, CEO is the only person who matters culture to a culture where ideas can stand on their own merits, because you're separating the hierarchical power structure of the organization from the power structure of the idea.
Hello and welcome to Mindshift, the podcast where we explore how to achieve a balanced, fulfilling life by changing the way we think. I'm Alina, the creator of this podcast. Having lived in 5 countries and learned 5 languages, I've connected with people from diverse backgrounds. I found that fundamental human struggles and dreams are remarkably similar despite our differences. Let's explore these similarities and differences together as we navigate a path to a fulfilling, peaceful life in our ever-changing world. Hey, welcome back to another episode of Mindshift with Alina. This is me. Today we have another special guest, someone who has revolutionized how companies approach innovation. He's the CEO of IdeaScale, a company that powers innovation for global giants like NASA, Comcast, NASCAR, and many others. He's also a Harvard MBA and has an incredible story of personal and professional growth. Welcome to the show, Nick Jain.
Alina, thank you so much for the warm introduction. I'm very excited to be here.
I'm very excited to have you here. Nick, your personal journey is quite remarkable. From being raised by your grandmother in a small city in India to graduating from Harvard Business School at the top of your class, this is just incredible. How has your international upbringing and education influenced your leadership style at IdeaScale, particularly when working with global organizations like Pfizer and the US Coast Guard?
Sure. So there's a lot to unpack there. Look, in terms of my personal upbringing, I had a very typical kind of immigrant background where my parents and grandparents made tremendous sacrifices in order to afford me a better opportunity and better life. So really, firstly, I want to call out and acknowledge them for the extraordinary sacrifice they made. They moved from India to Canada in an era where their college degrees didn't count. There's a lot more challenges that they had to overcome than anything I could imagine today. So I'm very thankful for that. I think how that's influenced my leadership style is 2 ways, right? I grew up with with a very humble background. With kind of we were never starving, but certainly not economically secure as a child, and that's meant that it's been born into me that, or bred into me that, to be hungry at all times, and to be to be hustling. And by hungry, I don't mean for food necessarily, but like, that tomorrow may be difficult, so you have to be prepared today. It's like that story about, the what is it, the grasshopper storing nuts for something for the season, right? One of Aesop's fables. I think that immigrant background means that I'm much more comfortable, like working my butt off to create security for the future. And that one of the things that's resulted in is like the way IdeaScale is run. So IdeaScale, we're a small technology company. And over the past 2 or 3 years, a lot of software companies have struggled as venture capitalists pulled back. A lot of companies have laid off people, made really difficult decisions. IdeaScale has been on the opposite side of that. Because we were managed very carefully, both by my predecessor and then by me, we were able to grow over the past 2 years. We didn't lay off people. In fact, we added people. And that what that's results in for our clients then is a company that is extremely stable and well managed. Because if you are buying software, this could be, you could be using Gmail. You wouldn't use Google Gmail if you didn't trust that they might not be around in 1 month or 6 months, because all of your emails, all of your photos on there could disappear. Similarly, for us as a software company, because we're managed in a very kind of stable way, our customers know we're going to be around. So large customers, like some of the folks you've mentioned, come to us for many reasons, but one of those reasons being this is a well-run company that will provide you an incredible level of technology and support and still be around a year or 5 years from now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So you would say it's that ability to manage the company long-term goals, right, and make it sustainably.
And be prudent, right? Like, it's very easy if you have a lot of money to just go spend a lot of stuff. But when you grow up a little bit poorer, that you want to conserve resources because your parents might not have jobs 6 months from now. And that's true of a company today. Today we're doing well, but if we're not in 6 months, we've been careful and prudent so we don't have to make stupid decisions or lay off people 6 months from now.
That sounds like an amazing financial planning at the same time. Yes. And also that builds trust, like you said, in a company. So as the CEO of IdeaScale, you've helped global organizations like NASA and Comcast drive innovation. In your experience, I know that you have this very unique insight on why do large companies often struggle with innovation and what can they do to overcome these challenges?
Sure. Let's start with a premise of what innovation or a definition of what innovation is. People always think of innovation as a new technology, a new gadget, a new toy. That's certainly one type of innovation. But innovation, more broadly defined, is how do you do something better tomorrow than you were doing today? And that could be just manufacturing that burger more efficiently, or it could be a
Mhm.
cool new toy or a new AI, whatever it is. Innovation is just getting better tomorrow. Um, and it's important because for any organization, if they're not serving their customers, their constituents, their nonprofit, the people that nonprofits serve, then they are failing themselves and their competitors get ahead or they become anachronistic. So the reason large organizations struggle to achieve innovation, and despite this being innovation being very important, is kind of three things. Number one, once you're large, you've already made it. You're successful. You've lost that hunger, right?
Right.
When you're poor and scrappy, whether it's an individual or a startup, you have to be hustling every day. You have to be working your butt off. Once you're the CEO of a $1 billion corporation or a company that's been around for 40 years, you're not going anywhere. That hunger to get better goes away a little bit, maybe a lot in some cases. The second is a lot of these organizations are much more focused at doing whatever they're already doing really well rather
Mhm.
than trying to do something new well, right? If you're already a world-class athlete at basketball, you're not also thinking about, hey, should I learn how to play football? Maybe there's one or two of those folks in history,
Mhm.
but most folks just become really good at one thing and that's all they do their entire lives.
Mhm.
So large companies, they've gotten good at whatever they're doing. They're not worrying about what else they can do or what else they should be doing. Um, and then the third is the internal processes and bureaucracy.
Mhm.
A lot of the large organizations, they have put the wrong people in place who are not innovative. They've created a culture where being innovative is actually penalized rather than rewarded. And like, hey, if you slap somebody every time they do something creative, they're going to stop being creative. And that's a bit of an exaggeration, but not that much. A lot of companies like look down on people who do some who rock the boat is the corporate
Mhm.
expression. And innovation definitionally rocks the boat. And then thirdly, even for companies that have the right people and the right culture to innovate, they often just tell a bunch of people go do creative stuff and then don't give them the resource to do so. It's like imagine telling a world-class athlete, "Hey, go win the Olympics, but we're not going to give you a gym, we're not going to give you shoes, we're not going to give you a coach." That would be crazy. Um, and so that's the third thing. Even for organizations that want to innovate, they're often telling people to do so with no resources, no technology, no processes. The good news
Mhm.
is these are solvable problems.
And your company does just that. I heard. Yeah, thank you for this explanation because a lot of times we do think about innovation in a certain way, but actually it can be business process innovation, not only product innovation, right? It can be
Yeah, exactly.
team management innovation, something that mm, improves the processes of business to make it more efficient, to make it earn more money, because that's essentially the goal of any business. And interesting thing I heard that you mentioned is that large companies don't prefer to do innovation, right? Because we're good enough in what we're doing, and let's just conserve what we already have because it's working, right? Let's not fix whatever is working already. And I've heard that approach a lot. And I think in general there are two approaches to life, to survival as a society. One is conservative, right, and another is innovation. Conservative is to preserve traditions, to preserve whatever works, and innovation is to create something new and risk it a little bit, but because the world changes around us, the circumstances changes all the time. I kind of feel like both approaches are valid, and we need to balance them out while preserving some traditions. We also should innovate because, yeah, every day the world changes. The economic system, the climate
Mhm.
change. I mean, everything changes, and we need to be able, as humans, to and organizations, to adapt to constantly changing environments. So I think that's when your approach, your company mission is so useful, right?
Thank you.
uh, the market always changes. So thank you for pointing that out about innovation, that it can be any type of innovation. So
Thanks.
I have a yeah. So I have another question for you. I'm curious to know many things. So having grown up, especially because your background, I myself am an immigrant. I actually grew up in Ukraine in a Korean immigrant family. So my family was immigrants. As I was, I grew up. I was born in Soviet Union. The Soviet Union collapsed, so we had to adapt. And later on, I migrated to the US. So I went to through many processes like that myself. So of adaptation to a new environment, basically, and not only adapting but also striving, which I think you did perfectly.
Thank you.
So having grown up in India and now leading a globally diverse team, how do you navigate cultural differences? I'm always curious about cultural differences in team management.
Sure. So we do have a global team at IdeaScale. I think we have
Mhm.
employees in 8 countries now, and we have for a long time. So I'll say a few things. Number one, and this is something you especially might appreciate having lived in different countries,
Mhm.
is people in different countries do have different ways of doing things, and sometimes those are values, right? Like it may be a religious value system or a cultural value system, so there are different values. But then separate from having different values, folks in different countries or different cultures may have different practices that are
Mhm.
different. Like they may believe in the exact same things, right? Almost
Mhm.
every civilized nation believes murder is bad, but the way they practice or penalize that, right, the criminal systems, the application of that principle may be different. And you have
Mhm.
to, I think, having lived in kind of three different countries for significant amounts of time, India, Canada, the United States,
Mhm.
has given me a greater appreciation for exactly how different those things are. Like, I think a lot of people assume that, hey, everyone's
Mhm.
more or less the same with, somebody may speak with this accent, that accent. But I think believe that there's really wide differences sometimes, and that you have to try and not just try and respect, you have to try and bridge that difference by respecting the other person's culture and traditions and systems of doing things. So that means that, for example, at IdeaScale, when we're working with employees based in Mexico versus the United States versus Bangladesh versus Japan, the interaction model is very different. The way
Mhm.
the way an American employee wants to be spoken to is very different than the way a Japanese employee would, right? The signal of respect is very different. When I do business in Japan, right? A fun thing in Japan's much more formal business culture, but one of the kind of things that's really important is you hand somebody a business card with two hands,
Oh yeah,
right?
like this.
And you have to make sure that it is also the text of the card is facing the right way towards the other person. Whereas in the United States, I know business cards are mostly going out of fashion, but no one really cared whether you handed it with one hand, whether the text is facing the other person or not. None of that mattered. And yet in Japan,
Mhm.
that is something that's very considered a very critical part of kind of business culture. So going back to your question, having lived in these different countries and having a different immigrant experience means that I think I'm much more explicitly cognizant or aware of a person's cultural background when interacting with them.
Mhm. Mhm. Do you do some kind of research on the culture before interacting with business partners, like some kind
Absolutely.
of?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So my very first when I was working in Wall Street, we had the CFO of one of Japan's biggest corporations, right? So
Mhm.
I'm like 25 at the time, quite young. I've
Mhm.
never done business in Japan. We have the CFO of one of a household name. It's a major global corporation
Mhm.
coming to visit us, and I'm in charge of running the meeting. So yes, I spent like half a day reading, like I googled a bunch about Japanese business traditions, made sure like. And then I briefed my boss saying, like, look, I know you're only going to be in the meeting for like 2 minutes. You're going to pop in and out, but here's what I need you to do because this meeting needs to go well, and I'm going to respect every dog. And I think the Japanese gentleman was really impressed by us versus some of the other investment firms that he was working with, because everyone else just showed up as a bunch of New York hedge fund guys, and me and our firm had actually taken the time to do some of these cultural research elements and acted on them. So yes, I do. And if I've never done business in Korea or Ukraine, but if I was ever doing business in Korea or Ukraine, I certainly would go do a bunch of research before I before I did any real work there.
That's great. I think definitely your multicultural experience gives you that understand and how important it can be. It can be, a deal breaker, deal maker sometimes.
Mhm.
Yeah,
But even beyond the business, it's just respectful, right? I would expect somebody to
exactly.
respect my boundaries, my cultures, my traditions, right? So I should certainly reciprocate. It's the golden rule, right? Treat others as you would like to be treated.
Definitely. I also have been a part of the US diplomatic community, and the diplomats spent months before going into their country to learn the culture and the language of the culture previously before going, because I think understanding the culture just gives you a competitive edge in terms of negotiation, because you can and trust. It's a lot of times it's about building trust with your partners, right? And like you said, respect towards other culture and differences, right? So yeah, I'm excited. Another question I wanted to ask you is AI is about AI. Obviously, it's on everybody's mind these days. So AI is playing an increasingly important role in shaping the future of business. How do you see AI influencing the innovation process? And I've seen that your company also started using AI tools. And how can organizations leverage it to stay competitive?
Sure. So I'll answer it in three parts. Firstly, let's define AI. AI has, in some way, shape, or form, been around since about 1960s, and it's basically
Hmm.
computers analyzing data to make decisions or recommendations. So it's more or
Hmm.
less been around for decades. What's changed over the last 2 years is all of a sudden now human beings can talk to computers in natural language without knowing any code, right? Like 10 years ago, you could have done some of the same stuff cool ChatGPT does today, but you needed to know how to talk in a computer's language. You need to be able to write Python code or whatever, right? What
Right.
changed 2 years ago was just the technology became accessible in a way that it was impossible for 99% of humanity. Today, you can speak Chinese to ChatGPT or English or any language in natural language. You don't know to know any. You don't need to know what a for loop is, which is a coding term. You
Mhm.
can just talk to a computer naturally. So that's what's changed, right? This fundamental ability for humans to interact with computers, it has become much simpler and easier and accessible. So how that's impacting kind of first of all, that's impacted everyone globally a lot. For us
Mhm.
at IdeaScale, it impacted us in two ways. Firstly, for internal operations, we were very early adopters of ChatGPT. So within months of it, within about 2 or 3 months of it coming out, uh, we adopted it for a lot of our internal processes, whether it be sales and marketing content. We adopted AI co-pilots in about 6 or 7 months after these tools started coming out. So we've been big adopters because it's made us much more efficient. And it's not just we're saying
Mhm.
we've been more efficient, we measured it. So, for example, our social media platform was primarily run by AI for a few months. And during those 3 months that we were testing it out, we gained more followers than our next four competitors combined. Even though they had full teams of social media staff, like full-time employees, I probably spent like 3 hours a month using my AI social media tool, and it was outperforming my competitors. So that's really powerful, and that's just one example. So we've just adopted it aggressively throughout our organization
Mhm.
internally. Secondly, is how we are implementing it into our own software and how that affects global innovation efforts.
Mhm.
Um, I think there's two things that are going to happen within the innovation community broadly. Number one is that there's going to be a lot more collaboration between a human being and an AI, agent or being, whatever if you want to use the term agentic AI, right? Agentic AI is a purely independent AI decision maker, whereas I think what you're going to see in practice for the foreseeable future is co-piloting, where a human being and an AI work together to come up with new
Mhm.
ideas or implement new ideas. In the same way that co-pilots have become very common in software engineering now, where the computer isn't writing its code, but the human being is working with the computer to write code better, faster, and more correctly. Or in creative, right? There's still artists are using prompt engineering to generate great images, but
Mhm.
the computers are not generating images by themselves. They're working with a human director. So that's change number one, that there's going to be a lot more direct collaboration between human beings and AI. The second area is AI being used for analytics? Because one of the really cool, powerful things that AI can do now is it can analyze qualitative data. It's very easy to analyze quantitative data. There's an entire field of mathematics called statistics for for doing analysis on numbers. It's very easy to add two people's weights or take the average of, 20 numbers or standard deviations. There's all this fancy math you can do for numerical analysis. But what modern AI has done is it now allows us to do qualitative data analytics. How do you analyze the value of an idea? That's a very amorphous concept, right? If I tell you, hey, I have an idea for a new soda can, how do you assess that? There's so many dimensions for that.
Yeah.
But AI can do that now. And that's the other kind of the second big thing that's happening in my field is AI is now being used to analyze qualitative data that was previously unanalyzable because it wasn't numerical data.
Mm-hmm. That's great. My first major was in computer science department, technical major, and second one was social sciences, like mass communications, media, And so I do know something about analyzing the qualitative data. Yeah, and how sometimes it's
Qualitative data is hard, right? Because
yeah.
you're coding it into a categorical variable and then doing classic statistics on it. But that's losing the richness of the data when you're basically saying, item A is category A, item B is category C,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. That's great. So another question I have, you mentioned that you retained a lot of personnel, right? At the same time, you implemented AI as a tool and you're
Yeah,
doing some
AI
processes
didn't
more
replace
efficient.
anybody here, thankfully.
Oh, wow, that's good. So what challenges and opportunities do you see like that in integrating AI into business innovation? And how do you
Sure.
balance its potential with the human element, right?
Sure. So I'll say a few things have changed. So AI did not replace anybody here, but we certainly have demand. Two things have changed from a personnel perspective. Number one is uh, you're expected to learn these technologies, right? So even if you are a genius coder, if you're not using AI, like you have to adapt to these technologies and become active users. So it's I think there's only been two or three hard decisions from the top I've made at IdeaScale where you're doing this because I'm the CEO and I'm saying this. One of them is every single employee needs to start adopting AI in their workflows. And that could be marketing people using to write marketing emails. That could be salespeople doing it to use research, to do prospect research. That could be software engineers using it to write code. It's a mandatory skill. Okay, that people are expected to learn these tools and always be adapting to the newest tools that are coming out.
Mhm.
Okay, if you're not adapting to those tools, then you are just not as effective as other employees, and that's a real problem. That's almost like an employee refusing to do his or her work. The second is in our hiring process. Using these tools has now become a core skill that people should have, and B, if you don't have it, you are so far behind the competition, right? So as part of our interview process, we'll ask folks to do things that would have been impossibly difficult 5 years ago because they could have taken, 3 weeks or 2 months to do, like a case study. But now that we know you have these tools that allow you to do it
Mhm.
100 times faster, you're expected to do something that would have taken a month to do, but because now it takes half an hour or an hour to do. So it's become much more a a gating process that if you don't have the skill set, you're just not as valuable, or you're just almost unemployable in many parts of the information worker economy. That's kind of how it's affected our world of running a company.
Mhm. Mhm. Is it difficult to transition for an employee from not using AI tools to using AI tools to stay competitive in the market, in your opinion?
I think it varies by person, right? It's obviously, it's there's many factors that play into it, like age, right? My parents are not going to learn AI, and my mother's played around with ChatGPT. She thinks it's
Mhm.
cool, but is she going to change her workflow? No, right?
Mhm.
Um, she's like, she just retired, but she had a year and a half of ChatGPT before
Yeah.
she retired, and she didn't change her workflow. She wasn't using it to change her Excel formulas at all. So going back, there's a few, for some employees, it will be more difficult to adapt, and for others, it will be less. There are factors that inform that, whether it be age, whether it be mental agility. Some people just like learning new things all the time. I'm a bit of a nerd. I'm taking classes on random things all the time. Probably a little bit easier for me versus somebody who just likes their routine schedule.
Yeah.
But here's kind of the rub or the difficult part. Um, it it's almost not an employee choice, right? If you're not adapting and learning something that is essential, capitalism is a very harsh mistress, right? It forces the world to adapt, right? If my company doesn't adapt and become better with technology, my competitors will. They'll outsell me and I'll go bankrupt. And that is true at an individual level too. If you don't learn essential skills, um, you're kind of forced out of the marketplace. So
Mhm.
it's an economic reality that it's not really a choice, right? Even if I, Nick, hated generative AI, if I didn't teach myself, then I'm not being a good CEO, and I will not be hireable for whatever that next job is for me 5 or 10 years from now. Nor should I
Mhm.
be.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a good point.
It's not a choice, right? You learn, or it's, what is it? Adapt or die, I think is the phrase, right?
Mhm.
If you don't adapt, you're
Mhm.
dead.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, that's exactly what I was pointing out on when I said that the
Mhm.
market changes, the reality of the market changes all the time. Yeah, and you have to adapt to the new environment, right? New conditions of the environment.
Mhm.
My podcast is mostly about the personal growth and fulfillment and professional growth as well. I want to ask you about the balance and personal fulfillment, right? But so, how do you find balance between high performance? I'm sure you have a lot of on your plate as a CEO of IdeaScale, and personal fulfillment uh, in general in life. How do you balance that?
Sure. So yeah, I work really hard. But I'll say a few things. I'm very fortunate. Number one, so I've got a wonderful wife. She works long hours too in a different job. I'm about to have my first child, so I am,
Oh,
pursuing the balanced part of life. Um, the work I'm one of the fortunate people in the world that I love what I do.
mhm,
I love growing companies. I love building stuff. And so, it's that old joke. If you find, what you love, you're never, it's, if you love your work, you're not really working. So I like what I do. It doesn't feel like working. But, beyond that, I have a very active family life, and I have a lot of hobbies that I pursue. Like, my personal hobbies are, I'm a competitive poker player. Uh, I'm reading a bunch of classical novels because I never read them as when I was young, and I've started realizing that I really love these things. And I'm taking a bunch of educational courses on topics that I think are really fascinating. Like, over the weekend, I learned how hard drives work at a very technical level, as well as how silicon chips are made at at a semiconductor fabrication facility. Those were
oh
really
wow.
like interesting things that they're not super useful for what I do in the software world, but it's like fun, right? So to answer your question, like, yes, I work hard, but A, I'm very fortunate to work at something that I love. But B, even if I didn't love what I do, I have these other activities in life that I pursue that give me a tremendous amount of joy, fulfillment, and personal growth.
That's great. That's really great because what I've heard, you just follow everything you're interested in. Maybe for some people, reading on the weekend about semiconductors would be like, "Oh my God, such a chore," but because you're so into it, you're interested in the topic. For you, you're actually resting when you're doing these things.
Yeah, I noticed I didn't read about, painting, right? I'm not
Uh
super
huh.
interested in painting. If somebody told
Uh
me, "Hey,
huh.
you have to learn about painting," then that would be a chore.
Mm-hmm.
I'd do it because, somebody told my boss told me to do it, but I wouldn't enjoy it. I'm thankfully
Mm-hmm.
very fortunate that I try and do things that, as you said, I enjoy in life.
Perfect. That's a good advice because you basically follow your passion or whatever things that you enjoy. You enjoy the process probably and getting results as well, but probably you enjoy the process as well because
Mhm.
probably process is 80% and results is 20. If you live from result to result, it's like, not sustainable. You
It's
should,
too you get too many highs and lows.
yeah.
If you need the adrenaline kick or the endorphin kick of
Hmm.
success or failure, that's not a very stable life emotionally or mentally.
Exactly. Okay, another question I have to you is about leadership. As a Harvard MBA graduate at the top of your class, what role do you think formal education plays in shaping leaders, and how does it compare to the real world leadership experience that you've gained?
Sure, that's a hard question. So, okay, I would say, I have like 4 or 5 things I probably want to say, and try and keep it tight. Firstly, is I think formal education is useful insofar as it opens a leader's mind to what's out there. Okay,
Hmm.
so I don't think so my undergraduate degree was in mathematics and physics. I certainly don't use that, but by learning those subjects and taking some art classes and some humanities classes, I learned that, hey, there's all these things out there that I don't know, but somebody else does, and I can
Hmm.
go access. Right? It
Hmm.
opens your mind to, hey, there's other brilliant things out there, and you should go, use what others do. And a practical implication of that is, when I run into a problem, I don't try and solve it. I go look up research on, hey, who is the best person in the world? Who already solved it? Did someone win a Nobel Prize for this problem? If so, I'm going to copy their solution. So it's mind opening. My business school education was largely useless in terms of leadership because of two things. Number one is we didn't actually have any course on proper leadership. They were just case studies of how different people had done things. But secondly, business school, at least at Harvard, was not a very evidence-based education. So it didn't actually say like, "Hey, here's what the proof says." Right. One of the
Mm-hmm.
things they said in my class, which kind of annoyed me, was, "Hey, every style of leader works." Turns out, no. If you actually go read the academic research, there are good styles of leadership and there are bad styles of leadership. And look, they were trying to make you feel, well, like, hey, if you're a person type A, it's okay, you can still be successful. But turns out there are, person type style B may just be more effective, and you either, as person style A, have to adapt or realize I'm going to be less effective.
Mm-hmm.
So formal education in that respect has had very little impact on my leadership style
Mm-hmm.
um, or approach. Beyond knowing that, hey, if there's a right way to do something, I'm going to go look up the evidence because I know it exists out there. I don't have to reinvent the wheel. Um, for me personally, as there's multiple styles of leadership.
Mm-hmm.
In pursuing my own, the style of leadership I pursue is I tend to focus on two things. Number one, principles. I've laid out the at IdeaScale. Everyone knows the principles that Nick operates by. I try and be extremely ethical. I try and be extremely data oriented, and I try and focus on creating value for everyone. Those are kind of the uncompromising principles that I try and lead IdeaScale by. Everyone at IdeaScale should know this because it's been very clearly communicated. Um, and then the second element of
Mm-hmm.
my leadership style is I try and focus on the right answer above the ego, right? And so if I'm wrong, that's okay, because if you showed me what the right answer is, we both got better and we made a better decision for the company. So that's the second thing, that at IdeaScale, we really focus on the right answer rather than where the answer comes from or the ego. Now that means that sometimes feelings get hurt, right? Like if you sometimes publicly people point out that my idea is wrong, that hurts my feelings, but I think that is better for me to sacrifice my ego, or for every employee to sacrifice their ego a little bit, in order for us to make better decisions as a team.
Wow, that's incredible. Thank you so much for saying that out loud. Definitely. Yeah. It's difficult sometimes to sacrifice ego, but like you said, we are not infallible. We all make mistakes, right? It's better to just accept it the way it is and, yeah, just accept the feedback, right? Sometimes.
Mhm.
um, You've mentioned the concept of an idea meritocracy several times in past interviews. Can you explain what that means and how organizations can implement it to foster a more innovative culture?
Sure. An idea meritocracy dovetails right off, like very nicely off of what we were just talking about, which is sacrificing ego in favor of the right answer. So, an idea meritocracy is a place or a culture where the best idea wins no matter where it comes from, whether it comes from somebody who looks a bit different than you, speaks with a funny accent, is a junior person, works in a blue collar profession versus white collar profession. Most organizations are structured like a pyramid, right? There's somebody or a couple of people at the top, and their ideas carry much more voice or much more weight. So an idea from the CEO is much more likely to get done or implemented in almost any organization than the idea from the janitor. Okay? But that's the wrong way of thinking about it. Even if the CEO is the smartest person at the company, not everything, first of all, they don't have access to all of the information. If they're busy running a company, they're not sitting at the front lines at McDonald's talking to the million customers, right? McDonald's CEO, I know he or she spends like a couple days a year at the front line, but they're not living every single day with the customer problems, right? So I think an idea meritocracy is an organization where the best ideas, A, are heard, B, are seen around an organization, and C, are implemented if they're the best ideas. So idea meritocracies are meritocracy or culture where best ideas win no matter where they come from.
How interesting. You know, you mentioned the pyramid that each company or organization has a hierarchy. There has been, I've studied master's degree in South Korea, and I know I worked there as well. And so Korean work culture is very hierarchical, to the point that for example, like scientific debate is happening, right? And if your professor, your supervisor of the scientific project does not say something, you cannot go above his head and say something. Like, even though you have some great input, you don't say it out loud. And so, because the culture is very, very hierarchical, very, very in Japan, it's the same, similar thing. The culture itself kind of hinders innovation in that regard, because a lot of junior researchers have some great inputs, but they can't just voice it because there's their professor, like, who is above them, and they just, yeah, they just can't voice it. So there's no debate, there is no brainstorming.
One quick comment on that. So I'm not familiar with kind of
Mm-hmm.
Korean work culture. I've never done
Mm-hmm.
business. Japan is kind of infamous for
Mm-hmm.
having a hierarchical culture, but setting aside, countries or ethnic groups for a moment, the cool thing is there's a lot of research that shows at an organizational level that organizations where debate is encouraged, where reason triumphs over ego and emotion, run better and create more value for everyone. They create more value for their shareholders, better products for their customers, more employment and happier work cultures for their employees. Um, so again, I don't know enough to comment on kind of countrywide cultures, but there's just such an overwhelming body of evidence that idea meritocracies are better ways to run companies. But it is certainly a difficult transition to move from a top down, CEO is the only person who matters culture to a culture where ideas can stand on their own merits, because you're separating the hierarchical power structure of the organization from the power structure of the idea, which is perfectly doable. If you think about it, there's no reason why you can't separate the two things, right? There's many companies, for example, where top salespeople make more money than the CEO because they've separated the notion of money from the separation of power. The same can be true of ideas, that power can be separated from ideas within an organization, especially a healthy organization.
Mm-hmm. I'm pretty sure, like, as a leader, you have to be self-aware enough and confident enough, and, you know, to allow that type of innovate, like, to create that type of culture that for innovation, right? Have to be, once again, usually high ego we have because I feel like there are some certain issues that you haven't worked through, like psychological issues personally. And I've been through therapy, and after therapy, I feel like it's easier for me to let go of my ego, you know? So I kind of feel like it's related, like personal
Mhm.
development, mental health slash
No, I look it. Yeah, it's really hard,
person.
especially as the leader of an organization. Once you worked your butt off, you think you're very smart, to say like, hey, I may not be the smartest person in the room in every single circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
That is a difficult personal and organization change. But again, the
Mm-hmm.
positive impact of being willing to make that change and able to make that change is so enormous that it's
Mm-hmm.
essential, right? If I say like, hey, IdeaScale can be a much better company, we can hire twice as many people, we can create much better products for our customers, but the only reason we're not doing so is because I'm afraid of having my feelings hurt, then I have done my company and my organization, my employees, my customers, my shareholders a disservice, right?
Mm-hmm.
I should not let my ego, and I would encourage no executive to let their ego prevent the success of the organization, because then they're prioritizing themselves over their responsibilities.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow. Thank you so much. That's amazing. The last question I have for you: as a CEO, how do you balance day-to-day business operations with long-term innovation goals?
That's really hard, right? And I don't think I'm necessarily doing a perfect job at this today. Especially at a small company, there's just so many things going on, and we're such a small team that it's very easy for folks to, get me involved in things, right? Um, like customers email me sometimes, marketing departments, engineering departments. I'm kind of in touch with everyone. The good part about that is that it means that information is like very accessible. It means I know what's going on, and I can jump into things.
Mm-hmm.
The bad part of that is it means that I'm often too down in the details rather than thinking about the long term elements of the strategy
Mm-hmm.
of the business. The way to kind of I deal with that, and again, I don't think I do a great job of doing so today, is two things. Number one, I do believe philosophically that CEOs should be doing real work rather than thinking about like long term strategy and making PowerPoint presentations. I think In my personal view, even if I was running a $10 billion company, I would want to be hands-on involved in the business, not sitting in a boardroom far away from my customers or employees making PowerPoint presentations.
Mm-hmm.
That's a philosophical difference, and I may be right or wrong. We'll see about that in 20 years. However, the way I still do find a little bit of time to do long-term thinking here is in two ways. Number one, each week I actually have time settled on my calendar that's sacred. It's on the weekend when people aren't bothering me that I sit down and think about, okay, where are the big gaps in the organization? Where should I be spending my next week, next month, or next year focusing on, or what do we need to do as an organization? Number two is the way we measure success here at IdeaScale, at both at an individual and organizational level, is designed to be a long-term metric. So we're very fortunate that I don't have to worry about weekly or monthly metrics. We're really thinking about how are we creating value in the long term. My board is very effective at doing this. Is so the entire metric that everyone in the company knows about, which is like our net retention rate, our revenues, it all comes down into this thing called CLV, customer lifetime value. That is a metric that represents long-term value for software companies. And all of our employees are aware of this. They know how to calculate it. They know what the inputs are. And so we're all generally rowing in the right direction, making the decisions that help create long-term value for everyone.
Wow. Amazing. Thank you so much. Even though you think you're not perfect, I mean, for me, the fact that you're doing it and you're in the process means a lot. Better done than perfect, you know?
I like that.
So
I'm gonna steal that. Better done than perfect.
exactly. The fact that you're in the process, and the process is never perfect, right? But you try to make it a little bit better, and you have long-term goals. So really good insight about long-term metrics as well. Thank you so much for sharing this.
Thank you.
So, Nick, it's been an absolute pleasure to hear your journey and expertise in fostering innovation. Before we go, where can our listeners find you if they want to learn more or connect with you?
Sure. So for the company, our website is ideascale.com, spelt like that. I encourage everyone to check it out for kind of two reasons. Number one, we have the best blog in the entire world about how to do innovation practically. So it's an incredibly valuable information source, ranks up there with Wikipedia and Harvard Business Review. So incredibly high quality. Number two is if you go to the website, our software is completely free for individuals and organizations or teams less than 100 people. So if you're a small team or a small organization, our software is completely free. Just click Get Started Free. It takes less than a minute to use. No downloads required. Entirely online. Wonderful. And that's an enterprise grade piece of software that, again, some of the largest companies in the world use totally for free. If you want to get in touch with me personally, the best way is LinkedIn. My name is Nick Jain, Jain. I respond to 100% of messages on LinkedIn, so feel free to DM me.
That's great. Thanks again, Nick. And to our listeners, be sure to check out Nick's LinkedIn profile and also his ideascale.com website and keep up with his work at IdeaScale. If you found a value in today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review and share this episode with your others looking to innovate and grow. Until next time, keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible. Thank you for listening to Mindshift. This episode was made possible by pure enthusiasm and the decision to follow my dreams. You can help support future episodes by contributing on the platforms such as Buy Me a Coffee or Ko-fi, where you can find me as Alina Bartuli. Don't forget to subscribe to my social media. I hope you feel more satisfied and accomplished as you pursue a life that brings you happiness, peace, and inspiration. I'm Alina Bartuli, and I'm excited to continue this incredible journey with you. Bye-bye. Until next time.